With all due respect, you're just the grandma. We prefer to discuss these matters with the parents. The teacher, a woman with a voice as starched as her collar, dismissed me with a flick of her hand in front of a room full of wealthy, powerful mothers. She saw a quiet, silver-haired woman in a simple dress, an irrelevant guardian. She had no idea that my late daughter had made me the sole trustee of my granddaughter's educational fund, a fund that contained the entirety of the tech fortune I had built with my late husband. And she certainly had no idea that I was the anonymous benefactor the school had been desperately courting for months. And I was about to make my identity and my conditions very, very public. This is the story of a woman who was told she didn't have a voice and decided to buy the whole damn microphone. If you believe that a grandparent's love is the most powerful investment of all, subscribe now and hit the notification bell, because you are about to witness a school assembly they will never forget. The library at the Westwood Preparatory Academy smelled of old money and lemon polish. It was a cathedral of learning for the children of Silicon Valley's elite, with a tuition that rivaled a year at Stanford. I was here for a parent volunteer information session for the school's annual fundraising gala. I was the guardian of my 7-year-old granddaughter, Lily, a bright, beautiful, and painfully shy little girl who was my entire world. Her mother, my only daughter, had passed away from cancer 2 years prior, leaving me with the sacred, heartbreaking duty of raising her child. I had moved from my quiet home in Carmel to a house in Atherton to be her rock, her stability, her everything. I wanted to be involved in her school, to show her I was a part of her world in every way. The meeting was run by a formidable woman in her late 50s named Mrs. Delacorte, the head of the lower school and the undisputed queen bee of the parent community. She stood at a podium, a vision of tailored tweed and quiet authority, addressing a small sea of women who looked like they had all stepped out of a luxury brand catalog. They were the wives of venture capitalists and tech CEOs, women who chaired charities as a competitive sport. I sat in the back, feeling every bit the outsider in my simple, comfortable dress. When Mrs. Delacorte asked for volunteers for the Acquisitions Committee, the most prestigious and powerful group, I raised my hand. I had 30 years of experience in corporate acquisitions after all. She looked at me, a flicker of something, annoyance, confusion, in her eyes. "And you are?" she asked, her voice dripping with a chilly politeness. "I'm Eleanor Vance," I said. "I'm Lily Vance's grandmother and legal guardian." A low murmur went through the room. A grandmother. Not a CEO's wife. Not a name. Mrs. Delacorte's polite smile became a tight, dismissive line. "That's very sweet of you to offer, Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. "But the Acquisitions Committee is a very demanding role, requiring a great deal of financial acumen and a certain network. With all due respect, you're just the grandma. We prefer to discuss these matters with the parents. Perhaps you could help out with the coat check." Just the grandma. The words and the quiet, cruel titter of laughter that followed from the other women struck me with the force of a physical blow. It was not just an insult to me. It was an erasure of my role, of my love, of my very legal and moral standing in my granddaughter's life. I felt the blood drain from my face, but I held her gaze, my expression a mask of calm. "I see," I said, my voice quiet. "Thank you for clarifying." I stood up, walked out of that library, and my vengeance began. Will this heartless dismissal lead to a shocking karmic reckoning? This story of a hidden power is just getting started. If you're hooked by this story of karma, subscribe now so you don't miss the next chapter. My late husband, David, and I were not part of the world of Westwood Preparatory Academy. We were the people who had built the world they now inhabited. In the late 1980s, from a garage in Palo Alto, we founded a data compression company, a quiet, unglamorous, but utterly essential piece of the Internet's backbone. David was the genius coder. I was the CEO who turned his genius into a global enterprise. We sold the company in the late 90s for a sum that was, even by Silicon Valley standards, astronomical. But we never became the people who attended galas. We lived a quiet, private life, dedicated to our work, our daughter, and our philanthropy, which was always, always anonymous. When my daughter Sarah passed, she left me with two things: her beautiful daughter Lily and a sacred trust. I was the sole guardian of Lily and the sole trustee of the massive educational and family trust I had established for her years ago. The school, with its aggressive fundraising department, knew of the Vance Family Trust as a sort of mythical creature, a massive, anonymous local foundation they had been desperately trying to identify and court. They had no idea it was controlled by the quiet grandmother who dropped Lily off every morning in a 5-year-old Lexus. My granddaughter Lily was the heart of this conflict. She was brilliant and creative, but she was struggling in Westwood's rigid, hyper-competitive academic environment. She showed all the classic signs of dyslexia, a learning difference that required specialized, patient attention. Mrs. Delacourt, however, was a product of an old-school philosophy that believed in rigor above all else. She saw Lily's struggles not as a sign of a learning difference, but as a lack of effort, or worse, a lack of the Westwood intellect. My antagonist was not just a snob. She was a bad educator, a woman whose arrogant, one-size-fits-all approach was actively harming my grandchild. My fight was not just for my own dignity. It was for Lily's future. What is this hidden identity that could change everything? My first move was to try to solve the problem the right way, the way a concerned guardian should. I scheduled a formal meeting with Mrs. Delacourt and Lily's classroom teacher. I came prepared. As a former CEO, I knew how to build a case. I brought documented examples of Lily's work, articles from leading educational journals on dyslexia, and a list of recommended specialists. I was not there as a hysterical grandmother. I was there as a well-researched advocate for my child. The meeting was a masterclass in institutional gaslighting. Mrs. Delacourt listened with a look of pained patience, as if indulging a particularly tedious child. "Mrs. Vance," she began, when I had finished, her voice a silken weapon. "We have a very effective, very rigorous curriculum here at Westwood. It has been the foundation of our success for 50 years. Perhaps Lily is simply feeling a bit overwhelmed. Sometimes when a child comes from a less structured home environment," she let the sentence hang in the air, the implication clear. The problem wasn't the school. It was me, the grandma. The conflict was no longer a simple matter of a personal insult. It was a direct institutional refusal to meet my granddaughter's needs. The obstacle was a wall of smug, self-satisfied elitism. They were so convinced of their own perfection that they were blind to their failures. They suggested tutoring, at an extra exorbitant cost, and more diligence at home. They refused my request to have her evaluated by an educational psychologist. "We don't feel that's necessary at this stage," Mrs. Delacourt had concluded, standing up to signal the end of the meeting. "We find that with a little more effort, our students almost always rise to the occasion." I walked out of that meeting, not just humiliated, but terrified. They were not just ignoring my granddaughter's needs. They were actively damaging her confidence, making her believe that she was a failure. Will a secret from the past turn the tables? The ticking clock of this drama was the school's annual benefit gala, the very event I had tried to volunteer for. It was in 1 month. The centerpiece of their fundraising efforts this year was a new state-of-the-art athletics pavilion, a project that would cost millions and would do absolutely nothing to address the school's glaring deficiencies in learning support. The invitations went out, a thick cardstock affair that talked about building champions. It made my blood boil. They were more interested in building a new gym than in helping my granddaughter learn to read. A quiet subplot emerged in the form of Lily's art teacher, a young, kind woman named Ms. Albright. She was one of the few people at the school who saw Lily's true brilliance. "She sees the world differently, Mrs. Vance," she told me during a brief chat after school. "Her mind is incredible. The other teachers, they just don't get it." Ms. Albright was an ally, but she was a junior teacher with no power. Her support, however, was a crucial validation. It confirmed that I was not a crazy, overprotective grandmother. I was right. The complexity of my plan required a level of strategic thinking I hadn't used since my days as a CEO. I couldn't just throw money at the problem. A simple, large anonymous donation would be absorbed by the school's general fund and probably go straight to the new gym. A direct public confrontation would be seen as the tantrum of a disgruntled grandparent, and it would only hurt Lily in the long run. I needed to create a situation where they would be forced not only to take my money, but to accept my terms, and to do so in the most public way possible. I had to build a beautiful, irresistible Trojan horse. And their own beloved gala was the perfect way to get it inside the gates. But will the next event shock everyone? The plan was audacious. I called my old friend and business partner, a man named Richard, who now sat on the board of half a dozen major Silicon Valley companies. "Richard," I said, "I need to talk to the chairman of the board at Westwood Prep, a man named George Sterling. I believe you know him." Richard, who knew my full story, chuckled. "Let me guess," he said. "It's time to stop being anonymous." The turning point was the phone call that George Sterling, the powerful and deeply influential chairman of the board, made to the school's headmaster the next day. I was not on the call, but Richard, who had arranged it, told me every detail. Sterling, a man whose own children had long since graduated, had informed the headmaster that a major, anonymous benefactor he was connected with was considering a transformative seven-figure philanthropic gift to the school. The benefactor, he explained, was deeply passionate about education and had been impressed with Westwood's reputation, but was still in the exploratory phase. The benefactor had one small, eccentric request. They wanted to attend the upcoming gala, unannounced, to get a feel for the community. And they wanted to be seated at the table of the head of the lower school, a Mrs. Delacourt, to discuss the school's educational philosophy in a more informal setting. The headmaster, blinded by the scent of $1 million donation, had practically fallen over himself to agree. He had immediately called a panicked Mrs. Delacourt, informing her that the fate of the school's fundraising future rested on her ability to charm a mysterious VIP at her table. The power dynamic had just been completely, secretly, and hilariously inverted. Mrs. Delacourt, the woman who had dismissed me as just the grandma, was now unknowingly preparing to host her own executioner at the most important dinner of her career. How will this shocking secret change their lives forever? This incredible twist has you hooked? Subscribe now for more stories of delicious karma. The week leading up to the gala was, I imagine, one of the most stressful of Mrs. Delacourt's life. The immediate consequence of the chairman's call was that her world was turned upside down. The gala was no longer just a social event. It was the most important donor meeting of her career. I heard through the school grapevine that she was in a state of high alert, drilling the staff, triple-checking the menu, and agonizing over the seating chart. The most delicious repercussion was the phone call I received from her 2 days before the event. Her voice, which had been so full of chilly dismissal, was now a river of warm, liquid honey. "Eleanor, I was just thinking of you," she began, the lie so bald it was almost impressive. "I know we got off on the wrong foot, and I was hoping you'd allow me to make it up to you. I have a last-minute opening at my table for the gala on Saturday. I would be so honored if you would be my personal guest." I let the silence hang for a moment before replying, my voice a perfect imitation of a slightly flattered, slightly befuddled old woman. "Oh my! At your table? Mrs. Delacourt, are you sure? I wouldn't want to be in the way." "Nonsense," she'd chirped. "I insist. It will give us a chance to talk. About Lily. About everything." I had agreed, of course. She thought she was making a clever, strategic move, perhaps showing the mysterious benefactor how inclusive and welcoming she was to all members of the community, even the grandmas. She had no idea she was personally inviting her own doom to sit beside her. Will they overcome this new challenge? My growth in this final phase was in my complete and total embrace of my own power. For years, my wealth had been a quiet background fact of my life, a tool for private philanthropy. Now, I was learning to wield it as a strategic instrument of change. The challenge was to overcome my own instinct for anonymity, for a quiet life, and to step onto a very public stage. I prepared for the gala like a CEO preparing for a hostile takeover. I worked with my lawyer to draft the donation agreement. It was an ironclad document, a work of legal art. It detailed not just the amount, but the specific, non-negotiable conditions under which the money could be used. This was my vengeance, codified and notarized. My transformation was in the final shedding of my grandma persona. The night of the gala, I did not wear my simple, sensible dress. I wore a custom-made Armani gown, elegant, understated, and breathtakingly expensive. I wore the diamond necklace my husband had given me for our 30th anniversary, a piece that had sat in a safe for years. When I looked in the mirror, I saw not just Lily's grandmother. I saw Eleanor Vance, the co-founder of a tech empire, a woman who had negotiated billion-dollar deals and who was about to execute the most important transaction of her life. But what awaits them in the next confrontation? The gala was a glittering spectacle of Silicon Valley excess. The ballroom of the Rosewood Sand Hill Hotel was filled with the kings and queens of the tech world. I arrived and was immediately, and very publicly, greeted by a fawning Mrs. Delacourt. She took my arm and personally escorted me to her table, the most prominent one in the room, right in front of the stage. The other power moms at the table looked at me with open, undisguised confusion. "Eleanor, so glad you could make it," Mrs. Delacourt purred, as if we were old friends. "I'd like you to meet—" She began to introduce me, but was cut off by the arrival of George Sterling, the chairman of the board. He walked directly to our table, and to the utter shock of everyone, he bypassed Mrs. Delacourt and came straight to me, taking both of my hands in his. "Eleanor," he said, his voice booming with warmth, "you look magnificent. I am so glad you're here. We are all so excited for your announcement." The final pieces were in place. The stage was set. Mrs. Delacourt just stared, her mouth slightly open, a look of dawning, horrified comprehension on her face. The anonymous benefactor and just the grandma were the same person. The final confrontation will reveal everything, won't it? After the main course, George Sterling took the stage. "Tonight," he began, his voice full of excitement, "we have a very special surprise announcement. A new member of our community, a true visionary, has decided to make a transformative gift to Westwood." He paused for dramatic effect. "Please welcome to the stage, to share her vision with us, Mrs. Eleanor Vance." The climax was in the walk to the stage. I stood up, and a spotlight found me. Every eye in that ballroom was on me. I saw the faces of the women who had laughed at me in the library, their faces now masks of pure, stunned disbelief. I walked to the stage, not as a grandmother, but as the woman who was about to own the room. I took the microphone. "Thank you, George," I began, my voice clear and steady. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Eleanor Vance. I am, as some of you may know, Lily Vance's grandmother." I looked directly at Mrs. Delacourt's table. "It has come to my attention that this school, for all its wonderful qualities, has a significant gap in its resources, specifically for students with learning differences. The champions this school is so focused on building are not just on the athletic field. They are in every classroom struggling to be seen." I let that sink in. "Therefore," I continued, "on behalf of the Vance Family Trust, I am proud to announce a $1 million donation to Westwood Preparatory Academy." The room erupted in gasps and then thunderous applause. I held up a hand. "However," I said, the room falling silent again, "this gift comes with conditions." I pulled a piece of paper from my evening bag. 1. This money will be used exclusively to fund the creation of the Sarah Vance Center for Learning and Inclusivity, named for my late daughter. It will have its own dedicated staff of specialists. 2. The new center's director will be a nationally recognized expert in dyslexia whom my foundation has already selected. And 3. I paused, and my eyes found Mrs. Delacourt. The school will implement a new, mandatory, semester-long training program for all faculty on identifying and supporting diverse learning needs. And as a gesture of her commitment to this new vision, the head of the lower school, Mrs. Delacourt, has graciously volunteered to be the first to enroll. But how will this change their future? The vengeance was not in the donation. It was in the conditions. I had not just given them money. I had hijacked their agenda. In a public forum they could not escape. I had forced them to accept a new set of priorities. The athletics pavilion was forgotten. The new conversation was about the Sarah Vance Center. The consequences for Mrs. Delacourt were a public and profound humiliation. She was trapped. To refuse was to publicly defy the school's biggest benefactor. She was forced to enroll in the training program, her authority shattered, her ignorance exposed. She was no longer the queen bee. She was a cautionary tale. The long-term consequence for the school was a slow, painful, but ultimately positive cultural shift. The Sarah Vance Center became a beacon of excellence, helping dozens of children like Lily who had been struggling in silence. My granddaughter thrived. With the right support, her dyslexia was no longer a barrier, but simply a different way of seeing the world. She blossomed, her confidence and her love of learning restored. The emotional resolution for me was not in the defeat of my enemy, but in the victory of my granddaughter. What does the future hold for them? A year later, at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new center, Lily stood at the podium and read a poem she had written. Her voice was clear and confident. Mrs. Delacourt stood in the back of the crowd. After the ceremony, she came up to me. "The center is remarkable, Eleanor," she said, her voice quiet and humbled. "Thank you. You were right. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was enough. Do you think karma ends here? Every child learns differently. Every caregiver has a voice. This story is a powerful reminder that we should never underestimate the fierce advocacy of someone fighting for a child they love. It's a testament to the idea that sometimes, to be heard, you have to speak in a language that power understands. Have you ever had to fight to get the right educational resources for a child? Share your story of advocacy in the comments below. If this story of a grandmother's powerful love inspired you, please like and subscribe.